Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Green Room for DisrupTV. We are on episode 351. I'm here with my amazing co-host, Vala Afshar, and of course, some great guests. We're going to introduce our guests in reverse order of appearance. And what we'll do is ask them where they're coming in from and what they're talking about. And briefly, we'll hit that. And then, of course, we will kick off the show. So Eric and Alan. Eric, where are you coming in from? What are we talking about today?
Great to see you. Coming in from San Diego, we're talking about our new book, Learned Excellence.
Oh, I can't wait to read that. Alan, what are you talking about in Learned Excellence, and where are you coming in from?
I'm Ray. Happy to be here. Thank you for having us on the show. I'm joining you from Los Altos, California, which, as you and I can both agree, is the heart of Silicon Valley. Or maybe we'll agree to disagree on that. And as Eric mentioned, he and I are very excited to talk about our new book, Learned Excellence, which comes out on Monday.
Woo-hoo, we're getting the preview, everybody. That is awesome. So, Carmen, where are we coming in from, and what are we talking about?
I am coming in from Cape Cod in Massachusetts today, and I'm looking forward to talking about some of the trends that we're seeing in learning and development, especially as organizations are starting to build AI skills within their teams.
Oh, it's going to be super important for everyone to do that. Crawford, welcome back. Where are you coming in from?
How's it going, guys? Great to see you. I'm coming in from just up the road from Carmen, a place called Needham, Massachusetts, where IDC's headquarters is, just outside of Boston. And so just thrilled to be talking with you guys today. We'll talk a little bit about IDC's core business, about what we cover here at IDC, which is IT in the context of economic demand, what's hot in technology, and of course, wait for it, AI.
Oh, my. AI. What do you mean? What is AI? So
look forward to catching up with you guys.
Thanks, Carl.
One of the top analysts at one of the top analyst firms, if not most the foremost analysts in the space. So it's going to be amazing. Okay, with that, we're going to do the countdown. And I will do the countdown, and we will kick off the show. So 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on DisrupTV. My name is Vala Afshar. I'm the Chief Digital Evangelist at Salesforce and your co-host for the next hour. We welcome you to follow us on X at DisrupTV Show, and we'll do our best to answer any questions you have in the hour. It's my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Ray Wang. He's the CEO and founder of Constellation Research, best-selling author of Everybody Wants to Rule the World. I see Ray on TV. Ray, I think it's like daily now, everywhere. Fox Business, Yahoo Finance, CNBC News, Bloomberg. In my opinion, Ray is one of the top futurists to follow on X at RWANG0. Welcome, Ray Wang from India to DisrupTV.
Hey, you're right, Vala. I'm live here from Bombay, but hey, thanks for having me here. It's Vala Afshar, the Chief Digital Evangelist for Salesforce. He's also the author of his amazing new book called Boundless, A New Mindset for Unlimited Business Success. It's been available at one of the top sellers on Amazon, but more importantly, executives around the world follow his inspirational, insightful tweets. He's speaking and keynoting everywhere around the world, and more importantly, when he's not doing that, he's putting out his insightful analyses on outlets like ZDNet and, of course, on Bloomberg Television. So, hey, thanks for being on the show. And of course, we've got some amazing guests. Who do we have to come back and kick it off?
We have a first ballot Hall of Fame DisrupTV inductee who arguably helped launch our podcast February 8 years ago. He was guest 2 on our show. probably wasn't available for the first show, or he would have been guest one. Crawford Del Prete, president of IDC. Prior to his current role, Crawford served as IDC's chief operating officer. Throughout his career, IDC has established itself as a leading world's most prominent and trusted technology market intelligence provider. Crawford is a leading authority on the IT industry and has completed extensive research on structure and evolution of information technology industry. He's like you. He's frequently quoted in publication, Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, New York Times. He's on TV on a regular basis. I see him on Bloomberg Technology TV all the time. He was guest number 2 on our show, so thank you for launching our show 8 years ago. He's an incredible follow on X at Craw, again, early adopter, CRAW. Welcome, Craw. Welcome back, Craw.
Great to see you guys. How are you, Ray? Thanks for dialing in from India, and both of you. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to this, and again, it's so great to catch up with you guys on this format. I just think what you guys do is wonderful. I appreciate it, and I know the world appreciates it. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You're very, very kind. We really thank you for that. Hey, you guys look at forecasts at the beginning of the year. People rely on your forecasts for almost every part of their business, especially from the business and technology angle. I want to really stop to ask you, where are we? What's economic demand look like? And let's start there and kind of paint us the picture of what you see happening in 2024 based on your forecast.
Ray, it is such an uncertain time, and people need to be comfortable with this uncertainty. We do very, very regular waves of surveys. We can go back a year, we can go back 2 years in terms of IT sentiment. We aggregate economic forecasts all over the world. And right now, we're expecting GDP demand to be between 1.5% and 2%, maybe a little bit over 2%. But rounding to 2% overall GDP demand for this year.
So low. What's going on?
Yeah. So again, we have a lot of downward pressure right now in terms of total demand. And I think what we also do is we survey IT leaders. So we can go back a couple of years and look at sentiment really since we came out of COVID. And what we see is that actually the expectation that demand will be lower than people think has actually increased over time. If I go back about a year, about 30% of IT leaders thought that annual GDP would be lower than expectations. That crept up to 50% in the middle of last year, and now it's come back down to about 40%. And those that think it'll be higher was about half of the market a year ago. Now it's about a quarter of the market. But to be fair, about half of the market thinks it'll be about where forecasts are, or maybe a little bit better, and the rest think it'll be worse, or maybe a little bit, the same or worse. And so there's just, I think the way I take apart this data, and we can cut it by region, we can cut it by all kinds of different dimensions, is that there's just no certainty about the amount of uncertainty that people have to deal with. They have to deal with oil shocks. They have to deal with a prolonged war in the Ukraine. They have to deal with a war in Israel. And these are all exogenous events that are compounded by the fact that we are dealing with the end of free money. We're dealing with an extraordinary rise in interest rates over the last 2 years. And now we're dealing with fighting inflation and getting inflation down and getting interest rates down. And we all know, as the old saying goes, inflation and interest rates tend to go up like a rocket and they come down like a feather. And that makes it very, very challenging to try to figure out when we're going to get back to a certain set of normalcy. Now,
wow. We also,
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was saying we also have half of the world's population electing a leader this year. The other half can't vote. I'm just kidding. But we're actually
that's right. And so we have a tremendous amount of political uncertainty, and then we have the geopolitical uncertainty, or even balkanization that we've seen between relations between China and the West, and that of course complicates things. But you know what? In that whole context and backdrop, what's also very interesting to me is that we believe that, let's just pick a number, let's call it 2% for GDP growth. We think IT growth will actually be better this year. And IT growth will be, we think, between 6 and 7%.
Oh, wow.
For all categories together. And so what this underscores is what you write about in your book, what Vala talks about in his book, that IT has never been more critical to the central nervous system of enterprises. And you have to invest in it if you're going to get productivity gains, if you're going to get, if you're going to be able to delight your customers, and if you're going to be able to be a modern company.
What IDC clients love about your research is the level of specificity and precision in terms of segmentation across all the various categories, industries, geographies, technologies. Can we deep dive into this 6 to 7% increase? Where is this IT demand coming from? What are the top categories? And I suspect I know one of the categories, but
what do you think it could be, Vala?
Yeah. Well, I read religiously IDC blogs and research, and the prediction that most recently came out from IDC was spending on AI solutions will surpass $500 billion, $500 billion in the next 3 years. So I certainly know one category that's white hot.
Yeah, absolutely. So AI growth is going to be, continue to be very, very high. And we're going to see sustained double-digit growth in that category. We're going to see between 25 and 30% growth sustained between now and the 2026, 2027 timeframe. If I look at some of the bigger categories, there's some very interesting stories in the data. Infrastructure as a service, right? We have such huge expectations. That's what we saw in the market this week around whether it be Microsoft, whether it be Amazon. Infrastructure as a service will still grow over 20%, we believe, this year in terms of dollars. Now, that was growing at 30% a year and a half ago, but still over a 20% growth market. We'll see overall software. So AI is a subset of that, but overall software will still grow at over 10%, maybe between, let's call it 12, 13%. And then we'll see some of the core infrastructure categories, things like servers, things like storage, those will grow over 10%. And then we'll see core IT services, they'll grow between 4.5%. And then interestingly, and again, this is a category that the world has left for dead historically, right? You take a category like PCs, you're talking about 300 million units that every man, woman, and child who's connected to the internet and has the means to buy, they tend to sell between 600 and the ones Vala buys are like 3,000. But the ones that are
I have large language models running.
Yeah, you got a big model run. But again, even running with $600-700 up to $1,100, PCs are going to grow about 3% this year. Now, that may sound like a snooze fest, but let me tell you, this is a category that was dropping over 10% over the last couple of years. 3% growth in PCs adds a point of growth to overall IT demand. Wow. So very, very significant as we see that market start to flip back. So that just gives you a context of where we expect to see some of the growth.
And that's including the refresh cycle, which is huge, right? I mean, the PCs that actually have to happen. So
yeah, it is, and we've done a lot of analysis on that refresh cycle, and we expect to see, Ray. So it's actually fascinating. Windows upgrades are absolutely a thing, right? So whether it be Windows 7, where we saw a spike in demand, anywhere from the market was growing at about 10%, it grew to about 25%. Windows XP, that ended the life in 2014. There we saw a spike again from about market shrinking about 10% to growing about 10%. What's fascinating about the upgrade cycles for Windows is that the spike happens about 3 quarters before the upgrade. Wow. About 4 quarters before the upgrade. So we are expecting that you'll see an end of service probably in about the 4th quarter of next year, but we'll see that spike starting at the middle to end of this year, and we'll start to see demand start to ramp up associated with PCs as enterprises get ready for that upgrade.
That's pretty important. Now, along with those forecasts, you typically talk about tech adoption and some of the tech adoption trends that you're seeing. PCs are part of that tech adoption refresh. What else is hot? And of course, now's the time to talk a little bit about AI, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So every year, we go out and we talk to enterprises and we ask, where do you have to invest? What are the categories that you got to invest in? If you don't invest in them, you're really gonna fall behind. It's interesting to compare those things year over year. Top of the list over everything else is actually not AI, and I don't think this will be a surprise to you. Security. Security is absolutely the highest category. It was the highest category last year. It's the highest category again. What's moved into the number 2 category is actually IT infrastructure and making sure you have that resilience infrastructure. Number 3, wait for it, AI. AI jumped onto the list, came onto the list, and it's a category, AI and automation, everyone's focused on. And then 4 is app development, what I would argue is related to AI. And then 5 is the workplace and investing in my workplace for the future of work. And being able to provide a modern workplace as my workers start to figure out the right balance for them.
I saw a TV interview with you recently where you talked about the importance of companies' data and how it's worth more today than perhaps ever before. And maybe the jobs to be done are the same, but we're using technology to improve speed to value and personalization and intelligence and real-time ability to engage with stakeholders. When you talk about infrastructure improvements or application development and all infused with machine learning capabilities, how much is data on the top of mind and use of data and analytics when you're engaged with CXOs?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Vala. So we've now crossed over a threshold. We crossed over this threshold about in 2020, and that threshold is that now we've got more than half of the 2/3 of the GDP. So crossed over that threshold is now in data dense products and services. So these are in connected products and services that drip data. And this data can be harvested, and smart companies are making really, really valuable decisions about the whole life cycle of their product. And what's fascinating is that so many companies aren't taking advantage. They're not writing the applications to take advantage of data. So we actually did a survey and spoke to our customers about what is the half-life of your data? And it's fascinating. 75% of the companies we surveyed across the world, their data loses value within days. And 50% days. If they can't act on that data within days, it gets better. Half of their data loses significant value within hours, right? So now you're thinking about the ability to act on that data, whether that's, Boeing being able to act on data, and they could end up in a tragic situation, or whether that's a food service company being able to act on data that could also end up people getting sick or getting ill, or it's an optimization question. So this idea of being able to act on data, it's only going to compound as we start thinking about a world where AI is helping us and assisting us in making more business critical decisions. Because it's the old adage, garbage in, garbage out, always and still will apply.
Well, that's oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to kind of put a little wrapper around this use of data, because when I look at IDC news, recent news, 2024 predictions, by 2028, Gen AI-based tools will be capable of writing 70% of software tests. Of course, that's real-time need. Refactoring. Gen AI tools and cloud services provide platforms to initiate and execute 50% of code conversions and development tasks in the next 3 years. Intelligence apps. By 2026, more than 50% of consumers will employ AI through mobile devices to discover.
Right.
Number of developers are going to double. By 2026, maturation of Gen AI technologies catalyze accelerated growth of world's developers. So this shelf life of only days and hours, if not put into use, or let me say it differently, the folks that are going to put it into use are going to have these incredible capabilities. How do you compete with companies that right now are investing in data infrastructure and hyper automation so that they can deliver value at the speed of need? I just think companies are in trouble if they're not actually getting companies like yourself consulting them, saying, get in the game. You're in trouble if you don't get in the game.
If you're not investing in your data, if you're not structuring your data. So when we think about the top barriers to investing in generative AI, so all the things you mentioned, Vala, obviously we agree with because those are our predictions. But the reality is you're going to see software development massively transformed. But when we think about companies and taking advantage of their data and using LLMs, the barriers, one of the top barriers that comes up to using generative AI is that companies don't have the quality of their data in a place where they need to be able to make decisions off of it. And so the companies that haven't been investing in their data, they got a real problem. They have to invest in order to structure their data in order to make better decisions going forward. Because that's a problem that you really can't start taking advantage of these massive productivity gains that we're going to get if you're not investing in those areas. Now, security, privacy, those are all things that are also tops on the list. But I think that there is a silver lining here. The good news is once you get your data straight, we're going to see two things happen in generative AI. Generative AI is not going to be the same market that we've seen in the past, where you have to kind of roll your own and you have to kind of build your own model. Large companies will be able to do that. But just like the company you work for, Vala, you're going to see leading software companies roll out features that take advantage of generative AI. And so those companies that are investing in those modern platforms overnight will begin to take advantage of generative AI and the assist that they get in their workflows that'll become modernized in a way that will allow them to catch up very, very rapidly. I will say that you got to buy into the modern platforms. You got to be thinking about how you can automate your tasks, even if you're a mid-sized company, because if you don't, not participating is a recipe for going out of business.
Right. We actually, and there's that data scarcity that you're talking about, to put a wrapper on what was said, right? You might not have enough data to get to level of precision that your stakeholders are going to trust. And this is going to be a huge issue going forward. Without a data strategy, you don't get to play. So,
absolutely.
You've been talking about this, Crawford, for 10 years. I mean, honestly, no. I'm just saying, you obviously advise my company on a weekly, daily basis, but I hope people are listening, because this is, it's you're not going to survive. I don't mean to sound gloom and doom. I'm an optimist by nature.
Actually, what I'm trying to, and the story that I really want to leave people with is, it's this very optimistic story. We are going to see massive productivity gains from generative AI. We are going to redefine work. Actually, let me just leave you with one prediction that you didn't mention, Vala, which is by 2027, 40% of current job roles will be redefined or eliminated in G2000 organizations.
Wow.
Yeah, we're predicting
we're
predicting the biggest white collar recession in places like India by 2027. So some major things.
But 40% of jobs are going to be completely transformed. Yeah. They're going to be completely transformed. Do you remember when the three of us all entered the workforce and that personal computer was new on the desk? But before that, there was a typing pool. Before that, there was middle management that used to be shuffling paper between inbox and outbox. All that whole layer of management.
Hey, I like my select trick.
The ball. Remember the ball?
Yeah. Listen, now everybody runs their business on this.
Right.
You're right. You're right.
And so I think we're going to see a whole nother gain, a whole significant productivity gain.
Thank you so much. We're with Crawford Del Prete, president of IDC. You can follow him on Twitter at Crawl. We've had 5,000 people watching already live organically. This is pretty crazy. Thank you for being on the show.
Great to see you guys. I wish you well, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir. One of the smartest people I know, and an incredible advisor to my company, and one of my favorite guests. He drops a lot of nuggets. I got to watch this show on the weekend just so I can recap all of Crawford's forecasts and guidance. Well, we get the best and brightest on the show, and no exception for our next guest, Carmen Vetere, CMO of O'Reilly Media. For over 40 years, O'Reilly's mission has been to change the world by sharing knowledge of innovators. The O'Reilly Learning Platforms offers exclusive live training, interactive training, certification experiences, amazing books. If you're a technologist, you have O'Reilly books, videos, and more, making it easier for customers to develop the expertise they need. All the stuff Crawford talked about, we're responsible for helping folks learn and implement. Carmen is the Chief Marketing Officer, and he joined O'Reilly in 2017. Carmen oversees O'Reilly's demand generation activities, engagement marketing for its platform users, sales enablement support, brand development, and creative execution. All the roles of a CMO. I probably left 20 other things that Carmen is responsible for. Prior to O'Reilly, Carmen held marketing strategy roles at small companies like CVS Health and Virgin Money. Welcome, Carmen, to Disrupt TV.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have
Hey,
you.
we're really excited to have you. And one of the hottest spaces right now is how do we actually learn in the age of remote work, learn in the age of AI, learning, and we see reskilling, skilling, and development, something really hot. What's happening in this L&D space is learning and development, especially from the front lines, because you're there all the time.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about some of the big things that we're seeing right now. First, we're hearing from our customers that they're very much focused on outcomes, more so than anything else. What are the skills that their teams are building, and how do they attain those skills? How do they prove that they've attained those skills? Building on what Craw was saying, let's say that you're an organization that's looking to adopt AI. It's not just about AI. It's about the data and the data quality that you have. It's about the cloud infrastructure. It's about the software architecture that's going to support all of that. And so there's a whole set of skills associated with all of those disciplines that organizations want to see that their teams are building. And so our customers are really asking us to be able to guide users to those skills, show progress on how they're building those skills, and then prove that they have it. And so over the last year, to meet that need, we've been adding things like quizzes to all of our on-demand and live courses. We have started to issue open badges so that our users can prove that they actually have that credential or that associated skill after they've gone through some of those coursewares. And then we are starting to really build out progress reporting so organizations can see what their teams are doing from a skills development standpoint. The other big thing that we're seeing is that the way that people are interacting with learning content has really shifted, right? It used to all be organized by topic. Or you'd use search to go and figure out what course was relevant for you. And now, I've been calling that more of a shift towards guided discovery. So everything is now organized by role, and each role has an associated set of skills with that users may want to be able to study in. And so, if we use an example of that, let's say you're an individual contributor as a software developer, and you are moving towards a managerial role where you start to manage a team. Now you need skills, things like communication, leadership skills, the ability to set goals for your teams and presentations. You can now come to a learning platform like O'Reilly and indicate that that's the shift that you've made, and we can guide you towards the right learning content, but also help you make some decisions along the way. Things like, are you a beginner in this area? Are you an intermediate? What's your preference for learning? Do you want to read from an O'Reilly book? Do you want to take a live course on that? Do you want to watch a long and an on-demand video so that you can get the right content that works best for you? All of that lets organizations start to build towards an internal talent marketplace. Craw was sharing a lot about the growth in IT spending, and there are a lot of forecasts around talent shortages, particularly within the tech space. So understanding within your organization what skills you have and what members of your team have those skills really give you the ability to resource projects appropriately when you can go and see who has this skill, who's gone through the content and earned the skill and proven it along the way so that you can resource the work appropriately.
Yeah, go ahead.
The last big thing that I can share is a little bit about some of the trends that we're seeing and the topics and skills that people are looking at. So it's no surprise, but in the annual report that we released last week around some of the top content used on the platform, GPT content was up 3,600% year over year. We're seeing a lot more natural language processing. That was up almost 200% in usage on the platform. Cloud native content was up 175%. We tend to focus very much on tech. And so, O'Reilly has a long history there. It was really interesting to me when this year's report came out, though. We're seeing a lot of leadership skills growth in content usage. So communication skills were up 23%, professional development, more than 20% growth. Project management had 13% growth in some of the content that we were seeing.
3,600%. So when you hear NLP up nearly 200% and your mouth drops, then you hear 3,600%. But it's absolutely, this is the 2024 O'Reilly Technology Trends Report. And I'm in front of CXOs, much like you two, and talent and skills shortage and development is always in the top three challenges that these CXOs face. Integration issues typically come up. Data. It looks like only 4% of enterprise data is ready for AI usage. So there's an incredible amount of work that needs to be done there. But then talent. And of course, keeping and retaining talent too. It's not just developing talent, but once you have, your ML and prompt engineering expert, they're very much in demand. So tell us about how O'Reilly is helping companies in an affordable way, in a quick way, because the sense of urgency seems to be at the highest level I've witnessed. Reskill, upskill employees.
Yeah. So, we're following this quite closely, and we're following a lot of the market data around this. I think McKinsey last year put out some content in their annual technology trends outlook that there's significant supply and demand imbalances around some key talent. I think there was, they indicated something like one skilled person for every 10 job openings in AWS. And the same was true for new and emerging roles like compliance roles around AI. The World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report said that skilled technology workers are some of the most in demand. So all of that data suggests that hiring talent for these skills is going to be really challenging over the course of the coming decade, and they're going to be in short supply. I think the other implication of that with big supply and demand imbalances is that hiring is going to be really costly. If you think about the time that it takes for your talent acquisition team to be able to find the right candidate for a role, the time you're taking your existing engineering or tech team to go to interviews rather than actually working in their day job, the time it takes to ramp the individual that you hire, we're seeing some estimates that the cost to hire in some of these roles could be as high as $40,000 or more. And so in many cases, it's going to be a lot more sensible to upskill your existing team than to be able to hire for those roles. Otherwise, it becomes really costly. We see a lot of reports that, and hear feedback regularly, that individuals want to work for companies that are willing to invest in them. And so providing solutions to be able to upskill, continue to build those skills in an ongoing basis, providing tools like O'Reilly that support learning as you're doing your job and helping you do some problem solving, really help to drive employers as places of choice where people want to work, and helps to drive retention of those employees as well.
Those are great points. And, related to that, along with the leadership, along with, what skills people need to do, one of the biggest topics is really AI and ethics, and how organizations can look at AI and adopting it in a safe and ethical way. Give us your viewpoint. How are people doing that? And how are folks training their workplace and workforce to do this in a responsible way?
Yeah. And, maybe I start a little bit with how O'Reilly is approaching this, because we think it's really important to lead by example here. So we've integrated AI into our platform in several ways in the last few years, and we've been cautious about doing that in a pretty safe and ethical way. And, there's certainly different flavors of AI, right? And generative AI is probably posing new challenges more so than any of the AI that we've adopted so far. As we started to continue to expand the use of AI in the platform, I think the first step was to educate ourselves. We're a learning company after all, right? And so we had a team that worked pretty closely across several departments to understand the regulatory issues around this. What's the view of our content creators, our authors, the talent that's contributing all of our learning content? What's the financial impact on some of these things? And how is the technology actually going to be implemented? We as an organization tend to work from a really strong set of values, and we really want to do the right thing for each of our stakeholders. And in the case of AI, particularly generative AI, we want to make sure that the content contributors that we are working really closely with, who have crafted the underlying work and providing source material and training for some of the AI models, that they're getting compensated for that every time it gets used among our learners. We're also thinking about some of the other stakeholder groups, right, as we start to craft our own policies around that. So what are the guidelines for our authors on how they can use generative AI to help them in their work? And then, of course, what are the rules for our employees on how they can use Gen AI in their everyday tasks as well? All of that came together in an AI policy that we published in November, and it's live on the homepage of O'Reilly.com, along with a note from our president, Laura Baldwin, on why we felt like this was really important to do. But we're definitely looking at ways that we can compensate our talent for anything that comes out of the generative AI models that we're using inside our platform.
Yeah, so First thing you see on your website on the upper left. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty there. It's awesome.
The other thing there is all the content that we're putting out inside the platform, right? So we certainly want to be educating the same way. While we're doing this ourselves, we're bringing that content to the organizations and customers that are using our platform. And so there's a whole series of live events that we put into the platform that focuses on Gen AI in different verticals like finance, healthcare, government. We've been putting together some short form audio podcast type series on AI and how organizations are adopting it, putting in real world use cases so that they can see how others are doing it. And then we're publishing a number of books on this, and those are available in early release in the platform. It's something that we're watching really closely too. It's moving so quickly. And so, we are unique, I think, a little bit in the learning space by having that live event format. We're spinning up talks on this on a regular basis and bringing them to our learners in the platform so that they can hear from experts on how they're doing it in their organization.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall, just listening to the professional development folks, like debating and discussing, like, what is this going to look like 5 years from now? I have a 13-year-old, so he's going to go to high school next year, and then he'll spend 4 years in high school. I imagine 5 years from now, and he's a freshman in college, like, is he fetching information purely in a conversational way? And it's all semantic search, so it's super personalized. The system, whichever system is using, understands everything about him because it's ingesting unstructured data as well as professional learning management structured data. So the career pathing and the advice and even how you consume information, and he's an incredibly visual learner, like his dad. Even how you convey the output in formats that are best for the individual person. What are your thoughts, like, of how the nature of learning is going to change with technologies like Gen AI?
Yeah, I mean, just like you're describing, I think AI affects everything, right? And it's really thinking about that user interface, right? What is going to be the way that we access information in the future? I mean, I feel like we've seen a few different major user interface transitions over the course of the last several decades. My first computer had a DOS prompt, and then we moved to graphical user interfaces, and then the iPhone with touch. And now everything feels like it's moving towards this idea of the prompt, and that prompt might be voice-based or it might be text-based. And rather than getting an organized list of results like we're accustomed to getting from a search engine, we're getting a really specific answer to the question that we put in that is contextually relevant, but it's also personalized for us as individuals. And as we think about how that might apply to the learning space, I think there's a number of different ways that can come to life. We actually introduced a search feature into our learning platform in 2020 that we call O'Reilly Answers. And it really was just a prompt. What question do you have? How can I help?
Very cool. Very cool.
And that was based on BERT, one of the early large language models. But somebody could come and put a question in like, how do I set up a data lake on Azure? And we would surface a specific paragraph or section of a piece of written content on the platform and would give you 5 different choices. But you wouldn't have to search through a list of results to figure out which is best for you. Would give you those 5 cards, and you can figure out which best answered your question to help you learn in the flow of work, essentially, right? Rather than turning to another solution where you're getting user-generated content or having to search through Google, here it is from a trusted source. And I think we continue to move in that direction, especially with Gen AI, right? How do we use the underlying trusted content that we have in the platform, but present our users with an answer so that they can get the information that they need at that moment that they really need it.
It doesn't surprise me that O'Reilly was doing this really 2.5 years before the world woke up to the power of Gen AI. I mean, using foundational models in 2020, that's awesome. That's kudos to you. That's great. Go ahead. You were saying
their own champagne. Look at that. So.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, it's where the innovators go to share knowledge. By the way, my last question for Carmen will be, what do Ray and I have to do to become O'Reilly authors? I mean, just give us the recipe and let us go do our work. But anyway, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah. So we're exploring generative AI with learning in a few other ways. So last fall, we introduced a beta feature that integrates with some of our text-based content on the platform.
Oh, awesome.
So there's something like a snippet of code in one of the pieces of content that's out there, and you're trying to learn something like, let's say, a new programming language, The Gen AI code explainer there can do a couple of different things to help with the learning of that. So first, let's say you're familiar with one programming language and learning another, it can translate it from the language you're learning to the language you're familiar with. So you can see the variations in syntax and start to break it down with something that's familiar to you. If you're more comfortable with natural language to understand how you can do that, it can turn it into natural language for you.
So it's really personally tailored to get to what actually learners want to be able to do. So that's pretty powerful. We're here with Carmen Vetere, Chief Marketing Officer at O'Reilly Media, one of the top publications and learning sites in the world. Thank you so much for being on the show, and happy Friday.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers. Love seeing CMOs that are technical, helping businesses grow. Okay, so this is, folks that are familiar with baseball, this is the cleanup hitter spot where guests usually come and hit a grand slam, and there's no exception here. So let me give me a few minutes to just introduce our next two guests. Dr. Eric Potterat is co-author of Learned Excellence, Mental Disciplines for Leading and Winning from the World's Top Performers. The book comes out Monday. So this is a high recommendation for everyone watching. Eric is clinical and performance psychologist and leading expert in individual and organizational performance optimization. Eric retired as a commander from the U.S. Navy after 20 years of service, during which he helped create the mental toughness curriculum used during Navy SEALs BUDS training. Unbelievable. Eric spent several years as director of specialized performance for the Dodgers. Red Sox need you, Eric, and has also worked with Red Bull athletes, the U.S. Women's National Soccer Team. I'm on the Red Sox advisory board, so I'm going to be calling you the Miami Heat and numerous Olympic athletes and NASA astronauts. Like Eric works with the best and brightest. Welcome, Eric, to DisrupTV.
Great to be here.
And along with Eric, we have Alan Eagle, also the co-author of Learned Excellence. Alan is author and executive communications consultant, helping leaders and companies shape and tell their stories. He has spent nearly 2 decades at Google, partnering with executives to communicate the company's stories to clients, partners, employees, and the public. He's a co-author of several books, including How Google Works and The $1 Trillion Coach. Welcome, Alan, to DisrupTV.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, and get in line. I've been trying to get Eric to come work for my San Francisco Giants, and it's a tough time.
I'm going to have the CIO of the Red Sox contact you, Eric, shortly. So you can turn him down.
We're going to fight for this.
No comment. Yeah.
Hey, to both of you, this is really, really important book, right? Your book is about the mental discipline of the world's best performers. And if we could put ourselves into the minds of them, like what you have done, this is really how you get to understanding that level of performance. So tell us about your backgrounds and how did you get to this level of expertise? Alan, what's your background behind this? And then, of course, we'll jump to you, Eric.
Well, I've been working in Silicon Valley almost 4 decades. I worked for 5 different startups, 2 successes, 3 failures. And then I spent the last 16 years at Google. And so, as you mentioned, I've written a couple of books, and Eric came and gave a talk at Google a few years ago, and I approached him afterwards because I was just fascinated by the topic. And it sort of made sense. My first book was about the management principles of Google. It was called How Google Works. My second book was about leadership and coaching in Silicon Valley, about the world's greatest executive coach, Bill Campbell. And I feel like performance is sort of the next step. It's kind of the trilogy. So that's how I came to be writing the book. I asked Eric, let's work on this together. And he said yes, and here we are.
That's an amazing partnership. Eric, tell us a little about your background as well.
Yeah. So as was stated, I did 20 years in the Navy. I was the head psychologist for the Navy SEALs my last 10 years in. I then transitioned to professional sport. I've worked with about 25,000 plus or minus really incredible performers over my career. And I just started to see literally throughout my work with these men and women that they really are doing roughly the same things, regardless of the discipline they're practicing. So whether it was first responders, military members, athletes, businessmen and women, surgeons, it just kind of stuck out off the page that, they're generally practicing the same mental techniques and, most of those are, what makes elite versus non-elite is really above the neck and between the ears. And the conclusion is, ironically, they're all learned disciplines. So this narrative of I can never do what he or she is doing because they were born that way, that really inspired me, as a professional to, hey, I really want to get this message out that, when you actually unpack and look, under the hood, as it were, with these individuals, they're roughly doing the same thing. So Alan and I started this partnership, and we interviewed about 32 of the world's top performers in this book from multiple disciplines: Cirque du Soleil, CIA, athletes, surgeons, etc. And the reader is invited with a mix of their stories and some research, and we make the strong evidence-based approach that these practices are in fact learned. So,
Eric, we had Mike Hayes, who's the best-selling author of Never Enough.
Yeah.
And he led Navy SEAL Team B. So 2,000 men and women under his command, served several tours, White House Fellow a couple of times. And you read his book, and he talks about like not being athletic. And then as a SEAL, he's doing like 50 pull-ups. And I read his book, and I've had the pleasure of spending time with him. He's a chief operating officer at VMware.
Yeah.
And first of all, my imposter syndrome kicks in like in overdrive. I'm like, I'm not 1/100th of this guy. And then I compare him with other business leaders. And I don't mean to sound disparaging towards business leaders, but I just feel like when you, for 20 years, like leading SEALs, and then you lead business professionals, I don't know how to ask this in a nice way. How big is the gap between, I mean, how much do you have to go back and really slowly teach them how to achieve excellence when you have left the world's best, toughest men and women doing work that's life mission critical? Do you have to really step back, or is there a common methodology that you use?
So let me just state, obviously, I'm not a SEAL. I was their performance and clinical psychologist, but having worked with them, I can tell you clearly the consequences are markedly different between what these men and women do in the special operations compared to business. However, when you look at the successful SEALs, successful businessmen and women, successful surgeons, it's athletes, the ingredients are roughly the same. They're very adaptable, they're adversity tolerant, their mindset approach is very similar. So again, Alan and I, we navigate that through the book, and we really, invite the reader to really understand these disciplines that are all consistently exercised and developed in these men and women who are the top performers on the planet. And I think, as Crawford said, this world is getting harder every day, right? It's the uncertainty is the understatement of the decade. And I think Alan and I do a reasonable job at providing a framework that's actionable, applicable, and practical that anyone can apply regardless of your discipline. So
yeah, and Eric and I we were texting while we were listening to Craw and Carmen talk, and we were kind of texting about how the stuff we talk about, the mental disciplines of performance, are even more important now. I mean, think about, okay, you're in a role where suddenly here comes this AI, GPT, generative AI sort of augmented solution. Does it scare you, or do you embrace it? Do you lean into it? What mindset do you adopt? How do you integrate it into your process? Every single discipline we talk about both applies to individual as well as cultural and organizational excellence, but even more in this rapidly changing world with these new technology tools.
That's amazing. I mean, you're coming from one of the most successful companies on earth, and a Navy SEAL,
and one of the fastest growing.
I mean, this is where 1 + 1 is 3. Yeah. So adaptability, high rate of learning, good judgment. It's more critical than ever. Sorry, Ray. I know you have many questions to ask, but I'm just in awe of both of you because you come from incredible backgrounds, and this book is going to be, it needs to be on the desk of every business leader. Go ahead, Ray.
And it will be on Monday when everyone gets a chance to get a hold of it. But in between, give us a sneak peek of what's going on with the mental approach that you describe in the book, because that's the heart and soul of some of those learnings.
Yeah, there are really 5 main or core disciplines that we unpack in detail. And when you look at these best, performing men and women, again, irrespective of discipline, they are really focused, and they double and triple down on their identity and their values versus reputation. And I know that sounds, at least at face, a little touchy-feely, but what they're doing is, most of us throughout our lifespan, we care less and less about what others think as we age and stage, right? As we get wiser, we just get more comfortable in our skin and our identity. When you look at these elite performers, they just seem to have accelerated that. They manifest that faster, where they just care less about blogs, fans, whatever, and they're focusing on those values. So we talk about that. And then we move to really unpack mindset. Mindset is a game changer. And the irony is, it's not innate. There's zero evidence to support that, mindset is something you're born with. You choose your mindset. So we unpack that as well. Then we talk about process. These elite performers are definitely more process oriented than outcome oriented. Alan and I will often say this, we're dumb, but we're not stupid. We understand that outcomes are very important, but you need to focus on the recipe and the process to get there. And that's what these men and women are doing. To more adversity tolerance. That's the big chapter for us, and the tools and techniques on how these elite performers learned to manage high pressure, high performance situations. Things like pre-performance routines, visualization, tactical breathing, positive self-talk. All of those things are very empirically based and are used. And then lastly, balance and recovery. So what do you do to make sure that you stay in that cycle of high performance and you have the proper rest and recovery and balance? So,
yeah,
Ray, you need to read that section, Ray.
Oh, we need to read it.
No, because he logs like 400,000 miles a year. Like he's never on. He's more in the air than on Earth, on ground. So anyway.
Actually, I don't know, Vala. I think it's because we both have immigrant parents. We might have picked up some of these. It wasn't structured in the right way.
Listen, I'm an immigrant refugee, and hard work was never not an option. Yeah. So my parents.
But this part was the piece. That's pretty hard to do.
Mental toughness. Yeah. When you're displaced from your birth country, it's pretty disruptive. So you learn to really quickly adapt, and you have zero sense of entitlement. The world doesn't owe you anything. You got to just work for it. But anyway, how can you build this? Okay, for our audience, and we have entrepreneurs, startup founders, folks that watch the show, and there's no shortcut to excellence. But is there something that they can start with? Monday they get your book, they start reading. What can they do immediately to put themselves in the right frame of mind to be able to not only read, but put your advice into practice?
Vala, you mentioned earlier the imposter syndrome, and Eric and I interviewed over 30 of these top performers. And for Eric, it was kind of just another day at work because he talks to them all the time. And for me, I was slightly in awe of several of the incredible people that we talked to, champion surfers, Carly Lloyd, perhaps the best women's soccer player of all time, and so on. And each one of them talked about learning and applying these principles. So it wasn't innate. And, you ask which one to start with. Well, we start the book with talking about values and goals. And Eric has a very specific exercise he goes through with each one of his clients, which is, let's develop a values credo. We all say, okay, we want to work based on our identity and who we are and not care about our reputation. And then you go, okay, what is my identity? And you sort of know it. And if you're older, maybe you know it a little bit more. But the values credo process is actually writing it down. Start with 10 or 20 identity markers. What are your values? What do you care about? What brings you joy? What brings you energy? Share it with people that you care about. Ruminate on it for a little while. And within a few weeks, you'll have a list of roughly 10 identity markers that really are the basis of who you are. And so we talked to several people in the book who, when they get in literally a cliff diver, when he gets on the top of the platform and he starts to worry about who he is or what the hell is he doing up there, he goes back to his identity credo, recites it. And so this is just, and we have in the book, we have a 30, 60, 90-day plan because we have 5 disciplines and we have practices you can do with each discipline that you could start doing tomorrow. But that's a lot of different things. So we say, okay, maybe you could start with the values credo and then and the next one. And then
you doing workshops in this space?
I hope you start a podcast. Do you have a podcast? I mean, Learned Excellence. would immediately be a Spotify #1 podcast. Something we haven't been able to achieve.
We're in talks to do both, actually. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Great.
Breaking news. I love breaking news.
I don't know. I think they know their publisher. I think they published my last book. Anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. That's awesome. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, related to that, I think this is really talking about what other things do you have to practice, right? There's learning excellent disciplines that are important. What disciplines do you practice yourself? Like, what are things that you guys do? Some of your favorites that you've picked up along the way, given the fact that you've worked with so many amazing people.
Yeah, I think one that comes top of mind for me is really around mindset. We've heard a lot about mindset. Obviously, the book Carol Dweck and her fantastic work. But for me, in order to weaponize a mindset, I came to understand through working with these, thousands of performers, that the best performers have different mindsets for every role that they play. And I know that sounds a bit academic, but what I mean by that is, think about a competitive athlete. An athlete gets paid to be competitive, gritty, relentless. And if they adopt that same mindset within a marriage, how do you suppose the marriage goes, right? Or with their children. So one of the first practices that I think Alan and I both practiced that were really learned from these elite performers is, when you look at the top men and women at their craft, they don't keep the same mindset for every role that they play. They shift the mindsets, right? They choose their mindset for a businessman and woman. They choose their mindset for how they're going to interact with their children, how they're going to interact with their communities, maybe on weekends playing sports, et cetera. So that's the first practice I would start with, that we all get to choose, and it keeps that residue from various roles from bleeding into other roles, right? Oftentimes,
and people are self-aware enough to know that off the field, on the field, they're different. And so you coach them to recognize that, when you have the cleats and you're diving and you have scar tissue and all that, that's fine. But you can't have that same approach at home or at work. Okay, that's my experience just managing people. I find like self-awareness is a superpower. A lot of people just don't have it. And I don't mean to generalize, but you're right. The exceptional people that I have the privilege of working with, they're exceptional people, are very self-aware. So they know not to be in fifth gear, in overdrive all the time. That's remarkable. That's remarkable.
One of the things
So yeah.
And when Eric talks about shifting mindset, you're like, okay, how do you do that? And we talk a lot in various practices in the book. It's simple things like just having a mantra or having a practice. And it sounds sort of corny, but in one of the stories in the book, we talk about how Eric was working with a Navy SEAL chief, and Eric told him, worked with him to, when he's home from deployment, when he's brushing his teeth, say, I am home from deployment. I have a toddler. It's a lot different than working with, actually come up with a mantra like that. Say those same words every morning. And it sounds silly, but it's really highly effective. And even, we talk about self-awareness or negative self-talk. Negative self-talk starts to creep in. Tell yourself, no, that is negative self-talk. I'm actually good at this or whatever. Like, come up with a mantra. And these practices actually work to shift your mindset.
I love that. The New England Patriots need you, Eric and Alan. The Celtics are okay. They're doing okay. But I mean, not that you don't need this, even if you're doing well, but we're going to have all 4 CIOs are going to be on our podcast: the Bruins, the Red Sox, the Celtics, and the Patriots, because I work with all of them. I can't wait I'm going to hand deliver your book to all 4 executives of these teams.
I'm telling you, and for the audience as well, the biggest
the Sharks, Giants, and Niners that actually combat this.
Literally, the biggest differentiator between elite and non-elite is above the neck and between the ears. It is that simple. And I mean, I know it sounds cliche, but I think we have a process to really kind of, have a framework around that and create a lot of believers as a result. So,
Eric, Alan, we thank you for being here. They're authors of Learned Excellence, Mental Disciplines for Leading and Winning from the World's Top Performers. The book is out February 6th. Order it now. Published by HarperCollins Business Press. So thank you so much for being on the show. And
thank you both.
Thanks
Congratulations.
You guys are awesome.
Bestseller. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
I got to read that book. We got to get better.
Yeah. The good news is we can, Ray. We don't have to be SEALs. We can do this.
No, we don't have to be SEALs.
Because I know you can't do 50 pull-ups. Neither can I.
Very,
Not
very,
even
very
close.
cool.
Wow.
Let's see them in the green room. But hey, what's going on with you? I mean, amazing.
Summarize the show, Ray, for those who are tuning in now and want to invest an hour watching episode 351. Summarize the show from one of our favorite guests, First Ballot Hall of Fame, to 3 other guests that have absolute potential of being DisrupTV First Ballot Hall of Famers.
For those that used to listen to NPR, this is the Stump the Chump section.
Where Ray has to summarize in 60 seconds or less. Go.
So, hey, look, we've had 7,000 viewers really listening in and alive, and this has been crazy. Paul started with sharing what's happening in the economic forecast. And believe it or not, the biggest issue wasn't AI. It was actually cybersecurity, which was pretty incredible. But there's so much emphasis. You know, GDP growth was sitting at about 1% to 2%, but IT tech spending, it's almost 6 to 7%. And I think it's going to be a good year for tech as well. So we're seeing lots of things happen from tech adoption to future of work, but that was probably some of the most insightful conversations about where we're headed next. Then we actually got a chance to talk to Carmen, and what we're really talking about is that learning is changing. L&D is different in this age of remote work. Employees are trying to figure out how to get to new skills, and those new skills are really, shifting the way we think about anything from, AI and safe, ethical approaches, trying to figure out how people learn in their own environments, and more importantly, how people are actually figuring out how to learn new skill sets off the bat. But we just finished out talking to Eric, and more importantly, Alan, really talking about this mental discipline that's needed. It's actually very, very important, because what we're seeing is it's all in here, and the top performers really have something really special in terms of this mental approach that they're getting to. So if you're following along, this is an awesome episode, and rewind back and watch it again. So
yeah, I'll be doing that this weekend for sure. Thank you for that recap. So next week, buckle your seatbelts, bring your popcorn. We got 4 incredible guests. Martha Cruz, co-founder, general partner at NXTP Ventures. Martha's joining us with Patricia Pastor, founder of GP Next Tier Ventures and Next Tier Ventures. So we've got incredible investors talking to us about what's hot and what's going to reshape industries and businesses. We have Raj Badaranath, Chief Marketing and Product Officer at Rootstock, an incredible innovative SaaS solution provider, and Patrick Hines, author of Failure is Not an Option. 2 knots, not an option. So again, the best authors, last year we had 75 authors on our show, and we're on pace to maybe shatter that this year already in early February. It's 8 years of DisrupTV, by the way. We launched February of 2016. So thank you for watching. Over 1,203 interviews during the last 8 years, and we look forward to getting to that 400 episode marker this year. If it's Friday, it's DisrupTV. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.
Yep. See you guys in the green room.